Good morning. All right, so I wanted to talk today about why I plant food in my front lawn and in my back lawn and everywhere I can. And I'm not going to talk about just sort of the ordinary, practical side of it. I'm going to talk about what it is that motivates me to do it because I think that might be interesting to some people, and I think it's more honest of me than just all the time saying, well, I do this because it provides this and because this is the better way to do it environmentally and all that. I'm going to get into what my real motivation is, and I want to actually hear what your real motivations are. What is it that drives us to do things differently? Because planting food in your front lawn is, right now in society, it's different. And why do we really do things that are different? So here's some of the thoughts that I've been having, and I'm just going to do this kind of stream of consciousness. If there's boring stuff, I'm just going to cut it. We'll move on. And so this might be a little choppier than usual, but this is just my thoughts on the psychology of doing things differently and what it is that motivates people who do things differently. So this is about planting food in your yard, but it's also about motivations and why. And the real motivations, not just like it's better for the earth. This is a real motivation. And yes, that's a motivation. It is better for the earth. That's a huge part of why I do it. But that's not what drove me to start doing things differently, if you're understanding that separation. So I like doing things that are unusual. And planting food in your front lawn is unusual in most neighborhoods. Sorry, my cats are fighting right now. We're just going to have to deal with that background noise. But when I plant in my front lawn, I put a new raised bed in there. I put up a big trellis. I grow beans. I grow, Jerusalem artichokes. I grow sea kale, right on the street. Why? Why would I put all of these things out there when I could have them in my backyard and I could have a nice lawn in my front yard? And I think that at the heart of it, part of it is because I love these things. I love eating these things. I love that. But I also really like kind of showing people that it's possible. Showing people that you don't have to waste that space. And honestly, I think lawns are a waste of space. And I know a lot of people love them. A lot of people love that green, flat look. And when I go to a park, I like having a nice green area to play frisbee on, to set up and have a picnic, because it's hard to have a picnic, in the middle of a garden with a whole lot of paths. I like to have that space, and we have some of that. We have quite a bit of that space in my backyard, but not just because I want it, more because my family likes it. But in my front lawn, I think it's just a waste, and so I feel like practically I kind of have to put something there. I really hate going out every day. Not every day. I really hate going out every week and mowing the front lawn and then coming in and, who uses their front lawn for anything after they mow it? What is it out there for? For most people, that front lawn is just out there as kind of a frame for their house. I want a more interesting frame for my house. That's one of the reasons. I know it sounds weird, but that's one of the reasons that I plant food in my front yard. I want a more interesting frame for my house. I want a more interesting frame for my life. I don't want to just be a person who has the same front lawn as everybody else and the same pretty bushes and rhododendrons and all that stuff around their house, and you drive by, you say, wow, that's really nice, but nobody stops and takes a second look. I want people to take a second look at my house. Maybe I'm a vegetable exhibitionist. I think that might be part of what's going on. It's like I'm a vegetable exhibitionist. I want to show people some interesting stuff when they drive by. Like at Christmas time, when you're driving through a neighborhood and there's a house that's all lit up with lights. I'm never going to be the guy who puts all those lights out there because I don't think it's practical. I feel like it can be it's gonna cost me too much in electricity and in stuff. Where am I gonna put we do actually have a couple of reindeer, but if I had more than 2 reindeer, where am I gonna put them? where do people put all this stuff that they put on their front lawn? So I get to do that in my front yard, but it still kind of feels practical because I'm also picking fruit and picking vegetables from that space. So I think that's one reason. So I love to have that interesting frame, but I also have this practical streak that says, yeah, but if you're going to have that interesting frame, you shouldn't have to store it all in your garage, all summer and wait for next winter. You should be able to go out and do something with it, like, pick some vegetables. So I don't know where that comes in. Maybe it's Protestant like guilt about like wasting things. I don't quite know where that comes in. But so anyway, that's one thing. The second thing is I really like the idea of self-sufficiency. When I started with this whole gardening business, I thought that I really was going to be able to be self-sufficient, even on just 1/10 of an acre for my food. I no longer think that I will get to that point. And it's not that I can't necessarily grow enough food on 1/10 of an acre. It's that I can't conceivably grow enough food on 1/10 of an acre, harvest all of that food, process all that food, and store all that food for the winter. Not only that, I think if I were focusing just on the vegetables and fruits that would produce enough for me to survive for the whole year just eating what I'm eating from the yard, then that would be probably a very limited diet. I'd probably have to have huge swaths of Jerusalem artichokes because they produce a whole lot of food in a very small space. I would have to, my fruit trees would have to be more mature, which they will get to that point. And so I think I could conceivably be self-sufficient with fruit, except for the processing side of it. And the thing is, producing your food is just one part of life. Other parts of life pay the bills for other things. So I could save a lot of money, and do save a lot of money on my groceries. I can save more, and I will save more over the years, but I would still have to pay for my kids' clothes, pay for our health insurance. I would still have to do a lot of practical things that you have to do when you're a middle-aged guy. You can't just spend all your time in the garden. And so that means that I've got to find other ways of making up the difference. And so if I had all the time, if my wife could pay all the bills and take care of everything, and I could just spend all of my time growing food, I would definitely do that. And I would probably be able to provide for most of the food. Maybe we'd spend a couple $100 a month for our family on additional stuff for food, but I could probably provide everything else. But I don't have that luxury, so the amount of time it would take, not just to grow it, because I could probably grow it, but to harvest, process, and store it, and the amount of space to store a year's worth of food or a winter's worth of food, that would be probably more than I would be able to do as one individual. And since I don't live on a trust fund, I have to do things that pay the bills, just don't have the bandwidth. So I love the idea of self-sufficiency. That's where I was going with this. Love the idea of self-sufficiency, but self-sufficiency also has to include paying your other bills and living in the real world in one way or another, unless you have a trust fund, unless you have a wife or husband who makes a lot of money and can just support what you do. So there's other things I have to do in life. And so that's, anyway, but I love the idea of self-sufficiency. And so that aesthetic has gotten me into, that got me into the whole gardening thing. And as time moved forward, I started to realize that that I was never going to step away from doing other things entirely. I could never just focus all of my energy on my garden. And so that's the part that, I just don't have the time and the bandwidth to grow all of our food for us. It's hard work. And especially, it's hard to do it all by yourself. And now I don't want this to come off as like bitter. See, I'm telling you, the cats aren't getting along very well today. I'm not bitter that my wife and my son have no interest in gardening. Actually, in some ways, I kind of prefer it that way because I get to be the boss and I get to make the decisions. And I think I'm kind of bossy sometimes. I don't know. I like to be able to make the decisions in the space, and so that part works great for me. However, like I say, the processing of things is if you want to make applesauce for 3 people, you kind of need 3 people making applesauce. And so I could go out, and we, as 3 people, could go out and probably forage enough apples to make applesauce for the whole year. Are we going to do that together? It's just not a thing we do together as a family. I do it with friends, but then their portion of the applesauce leaves the house. It doesn't stay and feed my wife and son. And so that I think that's a limitation on what I can do, well, on what we can do as a family in terms of producing our own food. So it's hard to do it solo, but I kind of like being able to make the decisions because I have these ideas I want to run with, like growing this particular kind of thing, and so if I had to do all of that by consensus, I think it would be hard. And the things that I would think, gosh, we're using all that space to grow, this thing that you want, and in my back of my head, I'd be thinking, no, but if we use that space for something else. So anyway, this way I kind of get to decide what I want to do. Anyway, it's kind of it's part of the psychology of why I don't produce quite as much, and it's I think it holds me back in some ways, being such an independent person in an area where you really benefit if you are a team player and if you have built that team, whether it be with your family or your friends, what have you. And I'm trying to build that team more with my friends and more locally, and that is working in some ways because I have more of a network of people, especially with the Food Forest Garden Club and Permaculture Providence, which I started a while ago. I still have lots of friends who I met through that. And so if I have extra of something, I can call them and say, hey, I've got extra of this. Do you want to help me process it and take some of it or what have you? And I join other people in that kind of stuff, but not as much as I'd like, and especially not right now with everybody kind of locked down. So, okay, so one more reason why I like to plant food in my front lawn, and my back lawn, my lawn in general. And part of it is that I really like variety. I love the unusualness of the things that you can grow, especially as well, actually, it's true about annuals and perennials. I was going to say, especially as a perennial gardener, but that's not true. So I guess I'll address why I integrate perennials in a second. But as an annual or perennial gardener, as a gardener, you can get such unusual food, and I just love that variety. I hate the idea of going to the grocery store and being stuck with whatever crap that they have put on the shelves and decided that's good for everyone. It's the least common denominator. Everybody's going to be happy with this kind of beets or this kind of kale or this kind of tomatoes. We're just going to put out the basics and make it good enough and kind of tasteless, and maybe it's organic, maybe it's not. I don't like to be stuck with that. I don't want to live a life where I only eat what I can buy or what I can afford to buy, because when you want really good quality stuff, that gets very expensive. And I love to support farmers markets and all of that, and I try to as much as possible. If I had to buy everything at a farmer's market rather than growing it myself, I just don't think I could do it. So I need to produce some of that if I want that unusualness, that uniqueness in my diet. And some of the things I would never be able to find. I mean, try going to the grocery store, or not, well, the grocery store, of course, but the farmer's market and buying figs. You're probably not going to find them in New England. So that's really an important consideration. And there's a number of things that I grow like that. Even things like Asian pears. You can buy one kind of Asian pear. If you go to, say, Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, you can't buy a variety of them. You can buy, maybe 6 kinds of apples. Are they the best apples? No, they appeal to a certain kind of taste that also happens to coincide with a fruit that will last long enough to ship it from the orchard all the way to the grocery store and then sit in the grocery store for a week or two. So when you buy an apple in the grocery store, it's appealing to conventional taste, which happens to be pretty sweet. Many people like their apples to taste like candy. And I don't. I like mine to be a little sharper, a little more crisp, a little more, I don't know, it feels like, some good apples are more alive. When I go to the grocery store and I pick up like a delicious apple or a Granny Smith apple, they all kind of taste, honestly, a bit like a pretend version of what I remember as a kid going to an orchard and tasting. And and driving back with sitting in the back of the Volvo with my sister and having a basket of apples that were just all these unusual kinds of apples, and just trying one after the other. And I remember just eating all the small ones just to taste them, and then we'd throw the core out the the little pop out window that used to be in the back. And just that kind of memory for me makes me want to have things that either remind me of my childhood or taste more like I feel like things should taste. And so when I go to the grocery store and I buy an apple, it just doesn't taste the way it should taste to me. So now it's, if I want that, I need to grow it. You can go to an orchard still and pick your own apples, but even those apples are starting to trend more toward the apples that everybody's used to in the grocery store. So at least around me. So I need to have my own trees for that. And it just the unusuals. I like to be able to taste things that nobody's ever going to sell, like Solomon seal shoots in the spring. You're never ever going to find that. You're probably not going to find hosta of several different varieties in the grocery store or at the farmer's market or whatever. It's a delicious food. I couldn't buy it in the store. So if I want that as part of my spring diet, I've got to grow it. And so there's so many things like that, so I want that variety and uniqueness. So I said I was going to talk about perennials, and that's a big part of what I plant. And I plant annuals every year too, but every year I try to incorporate another perennial food. And I was thinking about this morning. The difference between annuals and perennials is a lot like, I don't know if this is going to make sense to my gardener friends, but this will make sense to some of my other friends. It's a lot like the difference between, kind of being a long-term investor and being kind of a short-term day trader. I think of, my vegetable gardening stuff is kind of like, it's like a short-term profit kind of thing. You plant it in the spring, you get it that fall. And if it works out, you made a good trade. And I don't do a whole lot of trading in the stock market, but this is just sort of an analogy I'm using. I used to do a little bit more. I don't do that anymore because I'm not good at it. But anyway, it's a short-term trade though. You risk a section of your yard on this investment. Well, it's not an investment, on this day trade. And at the end of the summer, you harvest that. Either it works or it doesn't. Perennial garden, it's playing the long game. It's value investing. It takes longer to mature, but when it does, it can come in abundance. So like an apple tree. You plant an apple tree in 2021, say. You're not going to get the benefit of that until maybe 2025 or 2026. That's a long time. That's a long time. So I integrate new perennials into my garden every year, but I don't have the patience to just spend 1 year planting all perennials, no annuals. I need kind of that mix. So at the end of the summer, I get the immediate gratification. It's not quite immediate, but it's more immediate than a perennial food of an annual food. I get the immediate gratification from my annual food gardens. I get long-term appreciation. I'm playing the long game with the perennial foods. I still have to maintain them. I still have to prune my trees. I don't just walk away from them and let them go crazy. I still have to prune my trees. I still have to, in some cases, harvest some portion of what I'm growing. Or, maybe I've got shrubs that if I don't, trim them and prune them, they're going to get ungainly. They won't do as well in the long term. Maybe I have, perennials like I always talk about sea kale, which it's growing in a bunch of places, but hey, look, it grows great in this space, not quite as great in this other space, and so I have to move it around. I have to, make changes. So there's always some sort of work that goes into perennial gardening, and don't ever think that there isn't. However, not as much. After the first year, there's not as much work that goes into it as annual gardening. All of the work will, not all of the work, probably 75% of the work will be on the harvesting and the processing of the food. So never forget that when you plant something that will eventually come in abundance, you are going to have to spend and invest some time later on if you actually want to enjoy the food that you've spent so much time putting in. So anyway, that's why I always have some perennial foods going in, because it's that long game. But I also always have some annual foods because I love a good tomato. I love a good pepper. I love, other, potatoes. That's one thing that I have been growing more recently, and that's a short game thing. Even though I can grow my garlic more in a perennial kind of way, I still, it's kind of grown as an annual, and it's an annual investment of time and effort, an annual harvest of garlic, and then that process again. So it's more of an intensive thing, even though it's a perennial food, more of an intensive kind of process. And if you try to grow it without that intensiveness, you're just not going to have enough for the year. So at this point, when I harvest my garlic, I have enough probably for the next 6 months. Extending garlic beyond that, you really would have to move to a preservation technique where you freeze your garlic, or you find a way to can your garlic. And I really like working with fresh garlic, so I really only get like 6 months out of my garlic. But anyway, we're going on. That's too much of a tangent. I think I've kind of touched on this in many different ways today about like why do I plant food in my front lawn. I'm not sure I've gotten to the all of the deep psychological reasons why I plant food in my front lawn, but I thought it might be interesting just for me to go through this process, think it through with you, and now I want your responses. I want to hear why. What are the real reasons? Don't give me the whole I'm going to save the earth. I'm going to I don't know. Don't just spit back to me. If that's your real reason, that's great. I totally respect that. But I want to really know what's the psychology, what drives you to do things that are different. And in this case, I'm talking about planting food in my lawn. But what drives you to do things differently? And it might be that, or it might be some other thing that you just feel like you want to do in your own way. That's what I'm getting at here today. So, hope you enjoyed this bizarre rant, but I thought it was an interesting change of pace. Leave comments below, please. Please give me a thumbs up, or give me a thumbs down if you thought this was a really stupid video, and then I won't do quite as many of them perhaps in the future. But leave the comments below and let me know why you gave me a thumbs down. That's totally cool. If you feel like this was not the way you wanted this channel to go, let me know, and I'll pull back on this angle. But I'm always going to be here, telling you what I'm doing in my yard, how I'm creating things, what I'm planting, what foods I love, and so don't worry, I'm not going too far, not straying too far from that. Also, please do check out the foodforestgardenclub.org. We are growing by leaps and bounds at this point, having such a good time, especially the in-person meetup stuff, but finding that the website is becoming more of a place for people to connect, and finding that the ways we're connecting are kind of surprising to me. Like, one thing that we're starting to do is bulk orders for stuff. And so when we all want, say, the same kind of seed or what have you, we're starting to talk about that as a group. And we just started to do a little bit of group ordering. And that's kind of a fun thing that's come out of this. So this is really, it's becoming more of a community, and I just absolutely love that. I would love to see you there. I'd love to have your input there. foodforestgardenclub.org. Anyway, so I hope you have an awesome day. Please think about why you do things differently. And maybe that's why you plant food in your front lawn, or maybe that's why you grow a certain kind of something. Maybe that's why you do something that's not necessarily practical, but makes sense to you in some deeper way, on some deeper level. I want to hear it. All right. Have yourself a great day.